next hour on Trial Story. It's a case that captivated America.
Mr. Simpson is charged alone because he is the sole murderer.
O.J. Simpson charged with brutally killing his ex-wife and her friend. But he says he didn't do it. Hear the evidence the judge heard and see how she made her decision to try O.J. Simpson for murder in the next hour on Trial Story. From opening statements to the decision, a question of evidence, the O.J. Simpson hearing.
It was a very brutal murder and someone was extremely angry.
Mr. Simpson is charged alone because he is the sole murderer.
At the time that this murder took place, O.J. was at home.
The events unfolded like a script from a movie. First, news of two people brutally killed side by side in a fashionable Los Angeles neighborhood, Nicole Brown Simpson and a friend, Ronald Goldman. Then the realization that she was the ex-wife of one of the most famous athletes of our time, O.J. Simpson. And finally, the speculation that O.J. Simpson himself could have been the murderer.
Mr. Simpson is a fugitive of justice right now.
It seems everyone with a television watched what happened next. Just before police were to arrest O.J. Simpson for murder, he fled. But his whereabouts soon became known to the world as he was seen leading a car chase in a white Ford Bronco, allegedly holding a gun to his head. His friend Al Callings was driving the car.
Right now, we're okay, but you gotta tell the police to just back off. He's still alive, so he got a gun to his head.
The chase and the subsequent surrender ended where it should have begun, in court.
At this time, you wish you had her plead guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
But what happened next was an extraordinary turn of events. While the public was waiting for a decision from a grand jury, Judge Cecil Mills made a radical decision.
The court has ordered recusal of the 1993-94 grand jury from further consideration of this matter.
In what lawyers say may be a first, Judge Mills decided to dismiss the grand jury, saying that the jurors may have been influenced by intensive media coverage. The result is that a judge, not a grand jury, will determine in an open hearing if there is enough evidence to try O.J. Simpson for murder.
In most high-profile cases in recent years here in Los Angeles, prosecutors have tried to get an indictment through the grand jury. Now, it's a proceeding that's closed to the public and it's closed to the defense. More typical, though, is what's known as a preliminary hearing. There were more than 80,000 of them in California alone in 1993. Now, a preliminary hearing is really a miniature trial, and unlike the grand jury proceeding, it allows the defense, in this case O.J. Simpson's attorneys, the chance to challenge the state's witnesses through cross-examination. Join us in the next hour as Court TV looks beyond the hype, beyond the media story, at the evidence, and decide for yourself, is there enough evidence to send O.J. Simpson to trial?
The battle over evidence begins with the lawyers. Robert Shapiro, a well-respected Los Angeles defense attorney, he is known for his defense of high-profile clients. For one, Marlon Brando's son, Christian. Shapiro is aided by Gerald Ullman, a constitutional law expert. For the state, here's prosecutor Marcia Clark, who was brought in on the case just hours after the bodies were found. She's teaming up with her boss, William Hodgman. Combined, they've tried 60 murder cases. At issue here is the evidence. The state's case rests on circumstantial evidence. No eyewitnesses have come forward from the June 12 slayings, and no murder weapon has been produced. That leaves pieces of circumstantial evidence, 2 bloody gloves and drops of blood, evidence that will be the focus of testimony in this hearing. For O.J. Simpson, now being held in jail without bail, it has been a remarkable turn of events. From Football Hall of Famer, sports broadcaster, advertising pitchman, and movie star, to being charged with murder and possibly facing the death penalty. Simpson's defense attorney has publicly claimed that his client was at home at the time of the killings. It is undisputed that Simpson traveled to Chicago that night on an 11:45 flight. But Simpson's attorneys likely will not present a defense in this hearing, instead only challenging the state's evidence. That's because Simpson, in reality, has little chance of winning at this hearing. The prosecutors must convince Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell of only one thing, that there is enough evidence to go to trial. And prosecutors in California succeed 95% of the time. The prosecution calls its first witness, Alan Wattenberg, the owner of a retail cutlery store. Wattenberg testifies that on May 3rd, O.J. Simpson was shooting a movie outside his store.
Mr. Wattenberg, during the course of that afternoon, did the defendant ever come into your store while coloring?
Yes, he did. He had an interest in some knives that we sold.
What type of knives did the defendant express an interest in?
The item that I recall was a large lock blade knife.
And could you describe that particular type of knife a little further for us, sir?
Sure. This particular knife is about 15 inches in length when it's opened.
With regard to photograph A, sir, does that photograph depict some of the characteristics of the knife purchased by the defendant on May the 3rd and that you have described in your testimony?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Without producing a murder weapon, prosecutors are implying O.J. Simpson bought a knife like this one and used it to kill the victims. But then, Prosecutor Hodgman faces a potentially damaging issue.
Mr. Wattenberg, did you sign an agreement with the National Enquirer?
No, sir, I did not.
However, sir, do you expect to profit in some manner from your brother and your employee, Mr. Camacho, having signed such an agreement?
Yes, sir, I do.
And would you explain to us, please, how you expect to profit?
My brother and I, being equal partners in the business, are going to divide this money up three ways. Mr. Camacho will receive 1/3, my brother 1/3, and myself 1/3.
And what sum of money are we talking about, Mr. Wattenberg?
The figure, I believe, is $12,500.
Does selling his story hurt his credibility? On cross-examination, defense attorney Robert Shapiro tries to imply Wattenberg is lying.
Does your receipt have does your cash register record the individual prices for items that are sold during a given day?
Generally not, sir.
Have you checked your receipts for this particular?
Yes, I have.
And did they keep a list of the individual purchases?
No, this sale was just a cash sale, which was rung up on the cash register.
So what you are telling us is you have no records whatsoever to establish that this particular item for this particular price was sold on this particular day?
That would be correct, sir.
Wattenberg can provide no physical proof that O.J. Simpson bought the knife, so the state calls a salesman from the knife store.
Do those appear to be photographs of the type of knife that at one point that afternoon was sold to the defendant?
That's the item I sold him.
Or more accurately, an item like the one you sold him. Is that correct to your knowledge?
Yes, the first I know that's the item or like the one I sold to him.
Did the defendant ask you to do anything with regard to the knife?
He wanted it sharpened.
Okay. And after the defendant asked you to have the knife sharpened, what did you do?
So I gave it to Alan, so he went back to the shop and resharpened it.
The image of O.J. Simpson having a knife sharpened is a strong one. But then the prosecution must once again confront the issue of payment to a witness.
Did this fellow you referred to as Mr. Allen offer you money?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you anything else?
Well, he offered me $12,500 to tell him what happened in the story.
Did you sign a contract with the National Enquirer?
Yes, I did.
Did Mr. Richard Wattenberg, to your knowledge?
Yes.
It's a tough break for the prosecution. The two key witnesses were paid for their story. The judge must weigh their credibility. In the end, she must decide if prosecutors have met their burden of proof. And remember, At a trial, a jury must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. But here, the judge must be convinced only that there is a strong suspicion that O.J. Simpson committed the murders.
That justification is made. I will
emergency. Can you get someone over here now to 325 Gretna Green? He's back. Please. Well, okay, what does he look like? He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his...
This is the now famous telephone call by Nicole Brown Simpson that took place 8 months before she was killed.
He just drove up again. He just drove over. Wait a minute, what kind of car is he in? He's in a white Bronco. But first of all, he broke the back door down to get in. Okay, wait a minute, what's your name? Nicole Simpson. Okay.
On that 911 tape, Nicole Simpson complained that her ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, was threatening her. This is not the only evidence that the Simpsons' 7-year marriage was deeply troubled. They met in the late 1970s when Nicole was 18, and Simpson's record-setting football career was coming to an end. By all outward appearances, it seemed a passionate relationship. They had 2 children and lived a lavish lifestyle. But somewhere, something went wrong. In 1989, Simpson pleaded no contest to a charge that he beat his wife. In 1992, their marriage ended in divorce. They continued to see one another on and off. Nicole's family said she had broken off the relationship for good just before she was killed.
Ms. Clark, do you have additional witness to call at this time?
While this case has focused a national spotlight on battered wives, O.J. and Nicole Simpson's past relationship is not a part of this hearing. Instead, prosecutors must concentrate on the events of the night of the killings. The time frame is crucial.
My name is John DeBello.
John DeBello is the manager of Mezzaluna Restaurant, where Ronald Goldman worked. He saw Goldman not long before he was killed.
Did Ronald Goldman punch out that night?
Yes, he did.
What time?
9:33, and I initialed his time card.
If you know, sir, did you observe that he left immediately after he clocked out?
No, he did not.
What did he do, if you know?
Well, he loosened his tie and he took off his vest, and he had a drink. I think it was a Pellegrino or something.
So by your estimate, sir, you would say he left around 9:48, 9:50?
That's correct.
When he left, was he still wearing his uniform?
He did take his vest off and his tie.
But other than that, the shirt and the pants of the uniform he was still wearing when he left?
Yes, he was.
Did you ever see him again after that night?
No, I did not.
In court the next day, prosecutors call Pablo Fenges, a neighbor of Nicole Brown Simpson.
Directing your attention, sir, to the evening of June the 12th, 1994, Sunday night. Can you tell us where you were in the evening, sir?
I was home ready.
Can you tell us what you were doing at about 10 o'clock?
I had just turned on the Channel 5 news.
The Channel 5 News?
Yes,
And where were you watching television at that time?
upstairs in the bedroom with my wife.
At some point, while you were watching the 10 o'clock news on Channel 5, did something distract you?
Yes, about 15 or 20 minutes into it, I heard a dog barking, a sort of a plaintive wail.
Now, had dogs barked in that neighborhood before, sir?
Yes, but this was a pretty persistent barking that just wouldn't stop.
And that was at about 10:15 to 10:20?
Yes.
The next witness is Stephen Schwab, who was walking his own dog later that evening when he came upon a large white Akita.
It was unusual for a dog to just be wandering the neighborhood by itself, and the dog seemed agitated. It was barking at the house on the corner. I checked the collar to see if there was an address or a tag on there, but there wasn't, so I didn't know where the dog was from. And as I examined the dog further, I noticed that there was blood on the paws.
What time was it when you first saw that dog?
Well, I didn't look at my watch at the moment that this occurred, but based on the path and how long it generally takes me, I would say that was approximately 10:55.
Defense attorney Gerald Ullman challenges that time on cross-examination. Schwab had talked to police hours after finding the dog.
Mr. Schwab, the statement indicates that you told the officers you first encountered the Akita dog at 11:15 p.m. Is that correct?
is witchcraft.
Is that what the statement says?
The statement says that, yes.
All right. Is that what you told the officers?
I was trying to remember at that point, and at one point I did mention 11:15. Again, it was 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was very confused at that point as to what time all of this occurred.
For O.J. Simpson, the less certain witnesses are about the time of events, the better.
Raise your right hand, please.
Prosecutor Marcia Clark presses on, calling Sucre Bistepi, a neighbor of Stephen Schwab. Schwab turned the dog over to Bistepi, who then took the Akita for a walk later that night.
And where did the dog lead you?
South to Bundy.
And then where?
And then dog passed across the street to Bundy, cross the street to the other side, and then start to pull me a lot harder than it was before.
The point on the sidewalk where it stopped, was there a path of any kind?
Yes, it was a path to a house.
And what did you see?
I've seen a body.
Can you describe it?
It was a woman laying down horizontally all the way to the path. Face turned to me and on the right side.
After you saw that, sir, did you go walking up the path towards where the woman was lying?
No.
What did you do?
I tell my wife that there is a dead person there and we should call 911.
You may step down. I want to remind you.
These witnesses have been important for prosecutors because they set the time frame for when the killings could have taken place, sometime between 9:50 and 11:15 p.m. But the courtroom was focused on something else, a highly unusual event that happened earlier in the day. Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell was given a sealed envelope by another judge.
Whatever it is in the envelope here that I'm holding in my hand. At this time, I'm going to deliver this to the clerk, and the clerk of the court will maintain the possession and control of this until the appropriate time in these proceedings when that envelope will be opened and we'll be able to determine what in fact is inside it. I do not know what is in the envelope.
The judge decides to keep the envelope sealed until later. It became known as the mystery envelope. Evidence turned over to the court by the defense. There was wild speculation about just what was inside, but no one involved in the case was talking.
Physical evidence is in that.
The entire nation seems captivated by the O.J. Simpson case. But it's most important for these people. The family of Ronald Goldman and the family of Nicole Brown Simpson have come to court every day to hear the evidence against O.J. Simpson. One of the biggest challenges for prosecutors is to discredit Simpson's alibi. He claims he was home when the killings occurred.
Mr. Park, tell us what you do for a living.
Drive limousines.
Alan Park drove Simpson to the airport the night of the killings. He recalls arriving at Simpson's Brentwood mansion.
At about 10:40 is when I pulled up to the front gate. After, I came around first.
And you did not see the white Ford Bronco?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. And what happened after you buzzed?
There was no answer.
What did you do?
I continued to buzz the bell a few times after that.
Did you get an answer?
No.
For how long did you continue to ring the bell?
I rang it off and on until about 10:50 before I called my boss.
So from 10:40 to 10:50, you continued to ring the bell?
Yeah.
And you got no response?
No.
Park's testimony may help the state. He says Simpson did not answer his intercom at the time Simpson said he was home. Park then says he saw someone on Simpson's estate at around 10:55.
I saw somebody cross the driveway and go into the house from this area. Came out.
Was that person a male or a female?
I couldn't tell.
Can you describe the person?
6 foot, 200 pounds,
Black or white?
black.
What were they wearing?
Just seemed to be dark clothes.
And where did that person go?
Into the front door.
Of this residence?
Yes.
And when that person walked into the front door, what happened next?
A couple lights came on.
So 15 or 20 seconds after the person entered the house, you buzzed the gate.
Yes.
What happened then?
The intercom was answered by what I believe was Mr. Simpson. And he told me that he overslept and he just got out of the shower and that he'd be out and be down in a minute.
Was that unidentified person O.J. Simpson? The prosecutors want the judge to believe it was Simpson.
Can you describe the defendant's behavior that night when you saw him at the point that you were packing up the car with him and getting ready to leave?
Well, I've never met him before, so everything seemed okay to me.
Nothing seemed unusual to you?
No.
O.J. Simpson appeared uninjured and composed, but the testimony still leaves open the question, where was Simpson between 10 and 11 o'clock? On cross-examination, Robert Shapiro tries to discredit part of a key aspect of Park's testimony, the unidentified African-American person who he said entered Simpson's house.
You testified to the grand jury that it was a male black. Is that correct?
Yes.
You testified here today that it was a male or female, you couldn't tell which. Is that correct?
Yes.
Prior to your testimony today, has anyone pointed out that there may be a discrepancy in the testimony that you gave at the grand jury and the testimony that you were going to give today?
No.
Did you tell Mr. Jeff and myself that during the conversation on the 14th that the person that walked into the house in dark clothing was somebody you couldn't tell whether or not it was O.J. Simpson?
Yes.
What time did you tell us you left Mr. Simpson's house at the airport?
Time I left, 11:15.
Is that what you told us?
I can't remember.
Could you have told us different now?
Could have. It would have been right around there.
Would have been earlier or later?
Could have been either one. I don't know.
You're not sure these times, are you?
I don't know what I told you. I know what time I left. It had to have been right around 11:15, 10 after 11.
You wouldn't lie to me when I talked to you, would you?
No.
Alan Park does not back down under cross-examination, and he still leaves open the question of O.J. Simpson's whereabouts the evening of June 12th, the night the killings occurred.
Face the clerk, sir, and raise your right hand.
Prosecutors next call another key witness, Brian Cato Kalin, a friend who lived in one of Simpson's guest bungalows. He is the only witness who spent considerable time with O.J. Simpson on the day of the killings.
What time was it when you saw the defendant for the first time at the house on 360 Rockingham?
I think it was about 2:30 in the afternoon.
Did you have a conversation with him?
Yes.
And what was that conversation about?
I asked about his golf game. So he went golfing.
He told you he went golfing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes, he went golfing. I asked how he did. He said he did great. And then he played cards.
Did he say where he played cards?
No.
Did he mention what else he was going to do that day?
There was a dance recital that he was going to go to.
For who?
For Sydney, his daughter.
What time was that recital for his daughter Sydney supposed to begin?
5 o'clock.
Notice anything unusual about the defendant's behavior at that time?
No.
Do you recall him mentioning at some point during that day that he was through with Nicole?
Oh, that it was over, the relationship was over?
Yes.
Yeah,
When did he tell you that?
Oh, it was just something in kind of passing that they were not together anymore.
Can you describe the tone of voice in which he told you that?
It was casual.
Did not sound angry.
No.
What was the very next time you saw the defendant that day?
believe it was after the recital.
About what time was that?
I'm guessing about 6:30, 7 around there.
Yes, at about 7 o'clock. Did the defendant mention anything to you about Nicole?
That he saw her at the dance recital.
And what else did he say?
That her and friend, they were wearing tight outfits.
And
And it
make
was,
some mention about that? Make some comment about that?
it was a comment of being able to dress that way when the girls there.
And what was his tone of voice? Was it angry?
No.
What was it?
Kind of matter of fact.
Kaylin then testifies that a few hours later, he and Simpson drove to McDonald's for dinner.
On the way to McDonald's, did you happen to notice the time?
Yes, it is.
And where were you when you noticed what time it was?
26th and Simpson. It's a stoplight.
What time was it when you got to 26th and San Vicente?
It was 9:18, 9:15 to 9:18 was right in there on his clock in the car.
How long after that did you get to McDonald's?
About 7 minutes.
So he drove and he ate his dinner at the same time on the way back to Rockingham?
Yes.
Did you notice any injury to his hands at that time?
No, I did not.
Or bleeding?
No.
What time did you get home?
About 9:40, 9:45 around there.
Now, the prosecuting attorney hones in on that critical 10 to 11 p.m. time period. Kaylin testifies he went to his room and called a friend.
Called her about 10 around there.
During that phone call, did something unusual occur?
Yeah, I heard a noise.
How long had you been talking to your friend Rachel when you heard that noise?
It was probably a half hour into the conversation.
Okay, so about 10:40 or so you heard a noise?
About that time.
Can you describe for us the noise you heard, Mr. Kalin?
It was, my room, it has this wall and like that.
It sounded like 3 thumps.
Yes.
And where did the thump seem to come from?
Right behind the bedroom wall.
What happened when you heard those thumps?
Well, I was on the phone and I asked Rachel, I said, I think we have an earthquake. Do we have an earthquake? And no, she said, and I noticed my picture would move, so I was start thinking that maybe there was a person back there. And then I have this little flashlight, and I was going to investigate.
Testimony about this noise could be important. Later, prosecutors will use it to try to link O.J. Simpson to the killings. Kaylin then describes seeing Simpson before he went to the airport.
Approximately how much time did you spend with the defendant at the point that you saw him getting ready to leave in the limo?
How much time did I spend with him before? 3 minutes.
Very brief contact?
Yes.
How did he appear to you at that time?
Very first light.
In a rush?
Yes.
Did you have a lot of opportunity to watch him or look at him?
No.
Very brief contact?
Yes.
Did you see him get into the limo?
Yes.
Did you notice any injury to his hands?
No.
Although Kaylin was the prosecution's witness, his testimony may have helped the defense. Simpson's attorneys make a strategic decision not to cross-examine him. One of the things Judge Kennedy Powell will have to evaluate is whether the description of O.J. Simpson is that of a man who had just committed murder. There have been many reports about possible evidence against O.J. Simpson. 2 bloody gloves, blood on the Bronco, and blood droplets on the driveway. But in a bold move at an early stage in this case, the defense is challenging the admissibility of some of this evidence. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution says people have a right to be secure in their houses against unreasonable searches and seizures. O.J. Simpson's defense team claims the entry and search of Simpson's property hours after the killings was illegal. Police initially did not have a search warrant. The defense says authorities acted improperly and that evidence seized at that time should be declared inadmissible.
All right, I think that then we've come to that point in the proceedings where we are going to deal with the defense motion to suppress certain items of evidence.
Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell will hear testimony specifically on this issue. She will decide if certain key evidence will be admissible in the hearing. If prosecutors lose, it could end up hurting their case severely.
The state must justify the police entering Simpson's property without a warrant. Detective Furman says they arrived at the estate around 5 a.m.
I believe 3 of the 4 of us pushed the button and we could hear the ringing inside the residence, but no one answered the intercom.
For how long did you continue to do that?
It was at least 10 or 15 minutes. I noticed that the vehicle was parked rather strangely. It looked like it was parked in a very haphazard manner.
While other detectives tried telephoning Simpson in his house, Furman approached a white Bronco parked on the street.
I was looking over the vehicle from the front, and I came to the driver's door, and I saw a red stain above the chrome handle to the driver's door that was about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch square round, and I believe it to be blood. I told Detective Van Natter, I said, we got an emergency. We got a problem. We don't know if we have people inside that are in danger, dying, bleeding to death. We have to do something. I don't care whose house this is. We have to do something. We don't know if we have a murder-suicide, kidnapping another victim.
This is crucial testimony. Detective Furman is trying to justify why police entered Simpson's property without a warrant. In exceptional circumstances, it's allowed, such as if police believe there's an emergency.
We decided, Detective Van Natter decided that we will go in, and how are we going to do that? I said, I'll go over the wall. So I jumped the wall and went over and opened up the hydraulic gate.
Once on Simpson's property, the detectives find Cato Kalin asleep in the guest house. He told Furman about the thumping noise he had heard earlier in the evening. The detective investigated.
And then I saw when I was a few feet away that it was a glove.
Now, when you went back there, what were you actually looking for? What were you expecting to find?
I thought somebody had collapsed back there.
So you went for a body?
Yes.
When you saw that glove, did it have some significance to you?
Yes, it looked very similar to the glove that I observed on Bundy hours before.
At some time after the glove was located, were you requested to secure the house for the purpose of getting a search warrant?
Yes, almost immediately after the discovery of the glove, within minutes, Detective Van Natter said, "This is now a crime scene. Seal it, I'm going to go write a warrant."
Detective Furman is trying to show the police did not violate O.J. Simpson's Fourth Amendment rights. Much is at stake: the admissibility of the glove and the admissibility of blood drops found on Simpson's driveway. On cross-examination, defense attorney Gerald Ullman tries to convince the judge that Furman is lying.
Did anyone at this point suggest getting a search warrant before you entered the premises?
With what we knew, there was no time for that.
Well, was it a question of not having time for it or not having probable cause for it?
Well, I think we had plenty of probable cause if we wanted to write a search warrant at that point, ample. I think the problem...
Do you believe that the totality of circumstances that you're describing gave you probable cause for a search warrant?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, isn't there a procedure available in California whereby you can simply telephone and have a search warrant issued telephonically?
Telephone search warrant, yes, there is.
Have you ever used that procedure?
No.
Should the police have gotten a search warrant before entering O.J. Simpson's property? Philip Van Natter was the detective in charge at Simpson's home.
What were your concerns, sir?
Well, my concern was, again, we were with within 5 minutes of a very, very brutal murder scene. I knew that the scene was connected with Mr. Simpson because it was his ex-wife and children were there. After arriving there and learning that no one had any knowledge of any prior travel plans, seeing lights on in the residence, being told that there should be a living maid, I was concerned that something had occurred there, whether I had a second murder scene, whether I had someone injured, whether I had someone that was stalking Mr. Simpson and his wife, whatever. I have become concerned that someone could be hurt or injured in that location.
But on cross-examination, defense attorney Robert Shapiro tries to show that the detective is lying about his concerns.
If you were concerned about your safety, would you go in with backup units?
Definitely.
Did you go in with backup units?
No.
If you were concerned about your safety, would you go in with vest?
Definitely.
Did you go in with vest?
No.
If you were concerned about your safety, would you go in with weapons drawn?
If I was to, yes.
Did you go in with weapons drawn?
No.
Shapiro's point is this. If Detective Van Adder truly believed it was an emergency, why didn't police take the obvious precautions? The defense tries to underscore this point by calling Hadel Kalin back to the witness stand.
Did the officers ever indicate to you any concern about a suicide or a murder occurring on the premises at Rockingham?
No.
Did they ever indicate to you that they were concerned about any injured persons on the premises?
No.
The next witness draws a reaction from Simpson. It's his daughter. She also slept at the Simpson estate that night.
At any time up to this point, did any of the officers indicate to you that they were concerned that a suicide or a murder might have taken place on the Rockingham premises?
No, they did not.
Did they indicate they were concerned that anyone might be hurt or bleeding on the premises?
No.
Did they ask you whether anything unusual had happened the night before?
No.
For Arnell Simpson and the defense, the police were not acting like there was an emergency. And defense attorney Gerald Ullman argues this point.
Again and again, we heard the detective say, well, we didn't know what we had. We didn't know what had happened on these premises. Well, we know what they didn't have. They didn't have a search warrant. And if we were to carve out an exception to the Fourth Amendment for detectives who don't know what they have, in effect, we would turn the Fourth Amendment on its head. And we would say, the less you know, the more you can search.
But prosecutor Marcia Clark tells the judge the police acted properly.
It is absolutely incumbent upon them to do something at that point to assure themselves that the people inside that house are safe and secure, that there is not something horribly amiss, because they just come from a scene so gory that nothing could be more amiss than that. And the connection directly to the household of Mr. Simpson is absolutely clear.
So the most watched Fourth Amendment argument ever has come to a close. At stake, key evidence in the case. The judge rules the next day.
The court finds that they were in fact acting for a benevolent purpose in light of the brutal attack, and that a delay, and that they reasonably believed that a further delay could have resulted in the unnecessary loss of life. And therefore, the court denies the defense motion to suppress and will allow the introduction into evidence of the glove that was recovered and of the spattered blood spots that were located on the driveway once the sun came up.
Judge Kennedy Powell has ruled against O.J. Simpson. Prosecutors can now present evidence they say will link O.J. Simpson directly to the brutal killings.
Good morning. We're once again on the record in the case of People v. Simpson. The defendant is present.
As the preliminary hearing for O.J. Simpson moves toward an end, it enters a new stage. Prosecutors will now focus on the scientific evidence. But remember, the state must only convince the judge that there is a strong suspicion to believe O.J. Simpson committed the crimes.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Detective Tom Lang.
Detective Lang went to the crime scene early on the morning of June 13th and saw the bodies.
Additionally, I observed what appeared to be shoe prints, bloody shoe prints, leading from the area of the two victims up these steps and in a westerly direction along the walkway that is along the north side of the residence. There appeared to be several blood droplets among these bloody shoe prints leading away westerly from the bodies. These droplets appeared to have landed straight down on the pavement. It was apparent to me that these blood droplets were not directly associated with the victims and that they were perhaps in association with the bloody shoe prints leading from the scene. It was also apparent that they would be connected to a suspect in this instance.
The prosecution then tries to connect these blood droplets to O.J. Simpson. Detective Van Adder is recalled to the witness stand.
Did you notice anything unusual about either of his hands?
Not at first. When I first made contact with him, he had handcuffs on. Shortly after making contact with him, I removed the handcuffs, and I noticed a bandage on his left hand, the left middle finger in the upper joint area.
How did O.J. Simpson cut his finger? His lawyer said publicly it happened in Simpson's Chicago hotel room when he slammed down a glass upon hearing that his ex-wife had been killed. But prosecutors want the judge to believe Simpson cut his finger while committing murder.
Gregory Matheson.
Prosecutors hope this man will connect O.J. Simpson to the blood droplets found at the scene. Matheson is a crime scene analyst with the Los Angeles Police Department.
With respect to the blood samples that were retrieved from the defendant and from Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, with respect to those samples, did you test them also?
Yes, I did.
What tests did you perform on those?
On those, I performed the ABO lip packeting test, the Group 1 enzyme electrophoresis test, and the PGM subtype electrophoresis test.
And did you also subject the blood drop from the trail, item number 49, to those same tests?
Yes, I did.
And who, among the three that you have listed in the chart marked Peoples 24, could possibly have been source of that stain?
Of the three people that are described both in my report and on the report, only Mr. Simpson can be included in that percentage of the population that could have left that stain.
So Mr. Simpson alone is included in the 0.43% of the population that could have left the blood drop on the trail at 875 South Bundy?
Of the three people that are mentioned on the chart, that's correct.
Then by my math, we may, if my math is any good, we may fairly say that 99.57% of the population is excluded as a possible source of the blood drop found on the trail at 875 South Bundy, marked as item number 49.
That's correct.
This may be the most incriminating testimony so far against O.J. Simpson. Blood found at the crime scene is said to match Simpson's blood type and exclude the two victims. But defense attorney Gerald Ullman tries to show that these test results are far from conclusive.
When you talk about that kind of frequency in a population the size of Los Angeles, for example, where we have 8 million people, you're saying that there are something on the order of 40,000 to 80,000 other people whose blood would produce the identical genetic markers that you have identified in item 49. Is that correct?
Approximately, that's correct, yes.
Despite this cross-examination, Prosecutors have made the point that only a small percent of the population, including O.J. Simpson, could have been at the scene of the crime.
Good morning. Please face the clerk and raise your right hand.
The prosecution's last witness is Deputy Medical Examiner Erwin Golden. He performed the autopsies on Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Golden.
Did you observe any evidence of injury to the neck of Nicole Brown Simpson?
Yes, I did.
Would you describe what you observed, Dr. Golden?
The decedent had an incised wound, that is a cutting wound of the neck.
So this particular wound that you've described thus far was deep enough to cut through the neck and actually cause a nick on the spinal column, is that correct?
Yes.
So Dr. Golden, with regard to this particular wound, we have the complete severing of both carotid arteries, is that correct?
Yes.
And you have the near severing of one jugular vein and a nick in the other jugular vein, is that correct?
Yes.
Dr. Golden testified that Nicole Brown Simpson also suffered 4 other knife wounds and a blow to the head.
Did you form an opinion as to the cause of Ronald Goldman's death?
Yes.
And what was your opinion?
He died as a result of the multiple sharp injuries, which included the cutting wound of the left side of the neck, which severed or transected the left internal jugular vein, and the 2 stab wounds of the right side of the chest, which perforated the thorax and right lung, and the stab wound of the left side of the abdomen, which perforated the abdominal aorta.
In addition, Dr. Golden testified that both victims suffered defensive wounds to their hands. Dr. Golden is the prosecution's last witness, and as is almost routine in preliminary hearings, the defense does not call any witnesses, possibly not wishing to tip its hand in the likelihood the case goes to trial. Defense attorney Robert Shapiro gives his closing argument, saying the state has not proven its case.
A clear inference would be that the murderer was indeed covered with blood. The murderer would then have to do the following: abandon the bloody clothing because they have not been found or presented. Abandon the murder weapon because that has not been found or discovered. Abandon bloody shoes because they have not been found or discovered. And then go back to his house and leave a bloody glove in his backyard. That just doesn't stand up to logic.
Prosecutor Marcia Clark says the blood evidence is overwhelming.
And of the 43% of the population that could have been the source, the 0.43% that could have been the source of that blood draw, how many had a bloody glove found on their property mere hours after the murders occurred? A bloody glove that matched the bloody glove found at the crime scene, at the feet of one of the victims. That must considerably narrow down that figure. And so it's not just 99.57% of the population that is excluded, but virtually everyone but the defendant, when all of the evidence is taken into account, Your Honor.
Both the prosecution and the defense have made what they think is their strongest argument about whether O.J. Simpson should stand trial.
All right, at this time, the court will take a 15-minute recess. I will announce my ruling at 3 o'clock.
It's now up to Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell to make her decision. She returns in just half an hour.
The court has carefully considered the evidence in this case and the arguments of counsel. And keeping in mind that the proof in this matter is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the court feels that there is ample evidence to establish strong suspicion of the guilt of the accused, and therefore the motion to dismiss is denied at this time.
The judge concludes there is enough evidence to try O.J. Simpson for murder.
The court holds that the defendant be held to answer, therefore, that there be no bail allowed in this case, and that the defendant be committed to the custody of the sheriff of Los Angeles County
O.J. Simpson has been ordered to stand trial in Superior Court. Until then, he will remain in the Los Angeles County Jail.
The defendant is remanded at this time, and this court is adjourned.
In many ways, this preliminary hearing was like any other. What makes it different, of course, is the intense public interest in O.J. Simpson. The result is that more people than ever before have learned how the system works. But remember, this preliminary hearing does not necessarily reflect what will happen at Simpson's trial. If we've learned one lesson, a lesson we should keep in mind, it's that O.J. Simpson is innocent until proven guilty. For Court TV,